Are prisons how we get common day slaves? What does the 13th Amendment actually say about slavery? What is the prison industrial complex? And did Reagan plan for this all along?
Our government could have anyway been involved in drug trafficking.
How many niggas in cells, slaves to the prison itself? Since nobody read the fine print on the 13th, well, at least you got a street across the country still. But now you niggas causing riots, burning targets down. Need more police to keep the streets safe from y'all right now.
Hey, I'm Cam Hayden, and here on this channel, we like to approach the world with a scientific lens, ask questions about the world, and discover more about the world we live in. If you like this channel and like what I do here, the best way to support me is to like, comment, and subscribe. Outside of that, I'm a self-published author and an independent musician. Supporting either of the two keeps this channel going. Links in the description below. What if I told you slavery was never truly abolished? Not in its fullness, at least, but to explain, we have to take a better look at the fine print on the 13th Amendment. In 1865, Congress passed the 13th Amendment to end slavery across the country, or at least that's what we thought. In it, it states that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the parties shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So many people only ever mention that this amendment is what freed the slaves. And yeah, they're right. This amendment is what led to the freedom of slaves. This amendment also made slavery a legality constitutionally. I mean, it says there's no slavery except as a punishment for crime. Makes you wonder, why such specific language? I mean, we debate all sorts of amendments daily based on how loose the language tends to be within them. This one, though, is honestly quite direct. Should we take it to mean our government was thought to not be able to function without slave labor? Or should we take it to be a subtle hint at how we view criminals in society today? The next thing I want to look at is the prison industrial complex and how the U.S. prison operates.
The prison industrial complex is a system situated at the intersection of government and private interests. It uses prisons as a solution to social, political, and economic problems. It includes human rights violations, the death penalty, slave labor, policing, courts, the media, political prisoners, and the elimination of dissent.
This is an overall issue across the globe, but for this topic, I want to focus on the prison system within the US. The prison system is designed in a way that solely means to punish offenders rather than to aid them. We can see this from a variety of different angles, such as in the way living spaces are set up, food given, treatment by petty offenders from staff, experimentation of prisoners, and more. Not only are prisons designed to punish, they build a connective response within prisoners' heads that prevents them from finding comfort in returning to society. I mean, when you're removed from normal experiences in an ever-changing world and must return to this space, it can be hard to make sense of a world so removed from what you've had presented to yourself as normal. Depending on the crime, prisoners come out of prison with a number of legal issues that restrict them from finding any real footing in the world. Job options become limited, housing options as well, finances are impacted, and voting rights can be affected. After leaving prison, most people become what can only really be described as half a citizen. This funnels them into a cycle of rejoining their old life and old habits because they can't find ways to financially put their life back on track, which eventually leads them to returning to the prison system, where after a certain amount of time, it starts to be a better option than what's on the outside. This is part of why prisons contain so many repeat offenders, and honestly, it's the desired effect. I mean, the prison industry is one of the most profitable industries we have in the country, next to war. And when I say most profitable, I mean the prison industry is estimated to be worth 11 billion, and that's just the money estimated to be made from prison workers' production. This ignores the cost civilians pay for an average prisoner and the amount of money the federal and local governments pay private prisons, who must maintain a certain number of inmates or the government is fined. One of the #1 questions, though, is why does the US have one of the highest prison populations while only having 5% of the world's population. As it stands, we hold 20% of the world's prison population while only maintaining 5% of the global population. One of the largest proponents of this is the war on drugs. While not the biggest proponent of the war on drugs, it should be noted that the year after signing the Voting Rights Act, former President LBJ started this war on crime. Many of the systems implemented within the war on crime would go to help bolster Nixon's war on drugs.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse.
Nixon's war on drugs began in June 1971 when President Richard Nixon declared drug abuse to be public enemy number one and increased federal funding for drug control agencies and drug treatment efforts. At this point in time, the U.S. did have a drug issue. The only problem with this is that at the same time, the way that they were being implemented more heavily affected minority communities. There was the crack epidemic that infected the Black community on a large scale, crippling the community and coming in unexpectedly. We now know that the infiltration of crack into the Black community and America as a whole was due in part to the CIA. This is still a controversial issue, but we know that a reporter by the name of Gary Webb was responsible for coming to the knowledge that linked the CIA to the crack epidemic through his finding a link between one of the largest crack distributors, Ricky Ross.
It said that you were making up to $3 million a day.
I've had days that I made $3 million.
You had a $3 million day?
Yeah.
Okay.
A few of them.
A few of them.
And Oscar Delino Blandon, his informant and crack distributor, a CIA-backed Contra member. Now, to explain why the CIA was backing Contras requires a lot of backlogging on the Cold War, but in short, just know that funding the Contras was based on the reason for the creation of the CIA to combat the growing spread of communism during the Cold War. The growing crack epidemic is important because this is around the time when the African-American community was growing in strength throughout the country. Representation was growing, public opinion was changing, and the African-American household was gaining stability. It was no surprise to see hard drugs introduced into the Black community at this time. As Nixon's war on drugs grew in strength, more and more members of minority communities, in particular African Americans, found themselves facing higher incarceration rates. Not only were they finding themselves met with these higher incarceration rates, but also not only were they finding themselves with higher incarceration rates, but on average larger sentences than their white peers for the same crimes. The punishments grew with the introduction of the more strict forms of punishment, such as the 3 strikes law introduced in California, letting felons know after 2 felony offenses, the next one could lead to 25 to life. All of this info leads us to the main question of what's going on in the prisons and the question of whether or not the U.S. uses the prison system as a new form of slavery. So are U.S. prisons common day slavery? Now, before you get ahead of yourself, no, I don't believe that simply because a higher rate of minorities are placed within the prison system means that slavery is afoot. I do, however, after so much research, think that the U.S. does use the labor of prisoners and exploitation of law to gain an enslaved workforce. The reason this video even came into conception is because I came across an article covering a massive new investigation that tied the biggest corporations in America to prison labor. It struck curiosity within me and made me more interested in the idea because while this was all going on, we are seeing as different states find new ways to criminalize being homeless. I mean, it's gone so far that the cases have been brought to the Supreme Court. With the terrible job market and the cost of living growing, waves of mass layoffs and more people finding it harder to make enough to evade homelessness, it posed the question of what are the benefits of having a cheap or unpaid workforce and what does it do for the community and the economy? I mean, depending on the state, prisoners are either not compensated for their work or paid at a rate of as low as 12 cents an hour. After such a low rate. As much as 30% of what they make is taken out of their pay for room and board. Yes, that's right. Prisoners are often paying to stay in prison. The work isn't a suggestion, but forced act of labor. This is all just on a federal level and doesn't acknowledge the effects of private prisons that have lockup quotas, or to put it simply, a set amount of people who must be placed in their prison for them to get paid. If the quota isn't met, the American taxpayer is the one who pays the difference. I mean, 2 judges were found guilty of purposefully sending kids to for-profit jails to get financial kickbacks from those very same jails. So are prisons common day slavery? Absolutely. Even if you didn't do any of the research I had done, the proof is in the 13th Amendment. Slavery is illegal, but made legal by caveat. With research, you find not only is it true, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry that usually gets paid for by citizens of the US. So would I say that the solution is to get rid of prisons? That I'm unsure of. I agree that the abolition of the current prison system we have should be removed from our world, but I do believe in rehabilitation. I think people often commit crimes because of the failures of capitalism, and I think that prison is an easy solution to a bigger problem. Not enough focus is placed on the idea that once you become a criminal in the US carceral system, you also become a slave to the US. And some people would argue that you are already a slave. Sure, make that argument if you want to, that's fine. I tote this statement because it simply removed all aspects of your free will in this case. And not only do you become a slave, you become a slave much less than a human. There's studies over solitary confinement being deemed as literal torture, and that is one of the US's favorite things to do. We have the death penalty. We have a number of different associations where their studies ran to explain to people that when you're put in these prison settings, your mind doesn't immediately go to let me remain a criminal or let me start doing the things that the criminals around me are doing. These are all forced ideas. These are all forced motions. You're not this person, and most prisoners are not this person. Most people are, and I get a lot of flack for saying this, but people are inherently good. It's just that the society that we live in promotes being not a good person. It promotes you to choose and opt to be a worse person than you are, which is just a failing and a shortcoming of capitalism. If you want to go in the comment sections and tell me that capitalism is the only way, well, cool, you can say that. But with all of that being said, what are your thoughts? How do you feel about the prison system after learning so much about it? Comment down below, like, subscribe, and as always, thank you for tuning in.